Now it's time for the big finale. Thank you, Steve, for building this panel to help us see how AI is changing our industry. Steve is joined by Lauren Hassan from JLL New England, Dominic Endicott from Knowledge Towns, and Dan Kolaski from the College of Professional Studies at Northeastern University's Rue Institute. All these panelists have extensive experience in AI, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Please help give them a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're back. It's been a big day. Did you miss me? Anyway, nice to see everybody. Great questions after my session this morning. I really appreciate it. You can tell I've been talking ever since then because now my voice is really gone. I'm going to let them do the talking. They're the experts. This is our opportunity to kind of bring it down to the kind of the blocking and tackling level. I talked about a bunch of things at the high level of AI and what it means for our industry. These are the folks that are really doing some amazing work in reality on a day-to-day basis and have some great ideas and thoughts that we wanted to share with you. So what we'll do is quickly, we'll let Dan and Lauren and Dominic each share a little bit about what they're working on to sort of set the conversation, and then we'll dive into questions, and we'll probably take a few from you as well. So I've got a clicker. I'm going to pass it off, and it looks like, Dan, you're first.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope you've had a great day so far. Nice to see some familiar faces in the audience from either partners that are working with us at the Rue Institute or partners helping us build the new campus. My name is Dan Kolaski. I am a professor of the practice. I teach analytics and information systems, which loosely means I teach primarily AI's applicability to business. I've been with Northeastern and the Rue Institute for the last 5 years, and before that spent most of my career in enterprise software. But I've lived in Maine for 20 years, and it's been a real privilege to be able to join the Institute to try to build the tech and life sciences economy here in the state of Maine. We're excited about what's going on, and are very grateful for the opportunity to help grow the pie for everybody up here. So what I thought I would talk about is two things. The first is just a quick update on the project. Most of you, since this is a real estate crowd, many of you have driven by on I-295, our project to build the permanent campus for the Institute. For those who are not familiar, the Institute is one of Northeastern's 14 global campuses. The permanent campus represents about a $500 million investment in the state. And at the Institute, we are focused primarily on graduate level learning, research, and incubation of new companies, and through entrepreneurship in partnership with many of you and partners here in the state. So this is a quick view of what is going up at the site, the former site of the B&M Baked Bean Factory. On the bottom left there, you can see the current Baked Bean Factory building, which is being turned into an incubator for new venture creation. There'll be about 100 companies concurrently occupying that space. And that is the same building. A lot of work going into rehabbing and renovating that building, but that building will be there. That's on the left side of your screen. On the right-hand side is the Learning and Innovation Center, which is about just shy of 300,000 square feet, focused on classrooms, labs, experiential learning opportunities, event space, and all the things that go along with running the Institute. So we'll have startups co-located with us and partners co-located with us in the building on the left, and then the other one on the right. You guys had suggested we do a quick overhead view so you can see the site. It's around 13 acres, and I certainly am not going to pretend to speak eloquently about real estate development to a room full of folks in the industry. But what I will say, you were talking earlier about geothermal in Maine. There are over 80 geothermal wells on the site, so it will be powered by essentially localized and heated and cooled by localized energy source, which is pretty exciting. And the architects and engineers who are working on it have done really amazing work. As it relates to AI, so as I mentioned, my focus as a researcher and a teacher is on AI and its applicability to business. I'm just going to introduce briefly something that we do a lot of non-degree workforce upskilling for our partners, working with them to help them understand how to apply AI in the business. There's a framework that we've authored called TRIAD, which stands for the Targeted Review for Alignment, Integration, and Delivery, which is a simple, low-tech way for you to think about how to use AI in your enterprise. Steve was talking earlier about how AI can change the way you do business. And it guides you to ask some very simple questions. What do you really hope to get out of your use of technology that's going to be accretive in value to the firm? Contextually, how that would need to fit into the way you do business today, and then ultimately, at the sort of tactical level, how would we actually execute that? This is a free framework that's available for any of you to use with your folks. The link is here. You can download and use it. It's a thought experiment that helps you on the back of a napkin very quickly kind of understand how to think about contextualizing AI use for delivering ultimately enterprise value. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go.
We'll come back to that.
But that's sort of a little bit about sort of where I come from.
Excellent. Thank you. Lauren.
Is it me?
It is me. It is.
Okay, great. I'm Lauren Hassan. I lead our workplace strategy team for JLL in New England and New York. And I also just want to address that I'm not going to give birth on stage. I'm only 32 weeks, so I still have a little bit to go. It's a boy. He's the size of a pineapple. So I just want to get the FAQs out of the way so that we can all relax and just focus on the content at hand. Yeah, as Steve mentioned, we're doing a lot of work right now at JLL with AI internally and how that advances and accelerates our own processes related to commercial real estate. I spend most of my time with brokers and occupiers, and it's incredible to me the number of occupiers that are themselves AI companies that we're working with today. And so the question that I get time and time again, the formatting on this is a little different than it's supposed to be, but that's fine because the content is there, is essentially that we know we need to design spaces that are human-centric. So I like to say to our occupiers that AI first doesn't mean people second. We shouldn't be designing offices for robots. We are still designing offices for people. And what we need to be doing is really thinking about, are we creating spaces that nurture human capabilities like creativity, intuition, curiosity, innovation. And so what that actually translates to, we've taken a stab at, and again, I think everybody can have a copy of these slides today if they want. So you can dig into the details here, but really we're thinking about a lot of project-based work and how you design spaces that support project-based work and teams that are constantly shifting and changing. So in the example of these three space types, the Idea Factory, the Agile Studio, and the Immersive Pod, they each have different composition in terms of what in that space is fixed and what is flexible, what could be moved or changed. They each have a different intention around use duration. So how long would somebody use that space? And then the purpose is different for each of them. I should say, too, that we were on this really incredible trajectory pre-pandemic where we were thinking about agile space, flexible space, letting users hack their space. And then the pandemic we pressed pause because then nobody was in this space to actually use those incredible things that we had been designing. So the good news is that everything you're seeing in these models is something that you could go and buy and outfit your space with today, which is pretty incredible. So in the case of the Idea Factory, the idea is that that is a product team that's trying to launch something in short order, 6 to 9 months. They need a space that they own. Maybe it's badge access only, and that's where they're going to launch the first prototype for a product. The Agile Studio is more of a project team that's together for 1 to 2 years. Maybe that's a software development launch that's more complicated than a physical product. The Immersive Pod is inspired by Google Beam. Has anybody seen Google Beam in action if you've been in one of those pods? No. Oh. A few hands. It's holographic video conferencing. And so you're in this one-to-one experience with another person who could be in London, who could be in Munich, and you literally feel like you could reach out and shake their hand. And so if you can imagine how that changes the dynamics for, let's say, 2 CEOs that were gonna fly from Boston to London to have this very important meeting, now they can have that same experience in an immersive pod with Google Beam technology. So these are just 3 examples of how we think AI is transforming the way people work and the way we should be designing space. And I'll just leave it at that because there's more we're going to unpack.
Excellent. We'll come back to all of this. Dominic.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I am interested in building knowledge towns. There's a book of that name, but I actually want to create places that are called knowledge towns. We're building the first one in Andover, Massachusetts, Andover, North Andover, known as the Andovers, with Merrimack College as a partner. I believe there could be 1,000 of these, or maybe 10,000. And I guess what I've been looking at with AI is that remote work, which happened with COVID and got accelerated, hasn't come back, right? Still something like 25% of work is done remotely. I think AI is actually going to double that. I think more people are going to have the ability to do work anywhere, because effectively you can have one person working with 4 or 5 AIs. I think I've already become twice as productive as I was pre-AI, and it's only going to increase. And I think that's going to change where people want to live. And I think there's going to be a decentralized innovation wave, and that's what Knowledge Towns is about. Let's see. So this is a description of a knowledge town. And the idea is really, think about a neighborhood that could be about 2,000 to 4,000 new places built, anchored around 4 big ideas. Is it affordable? Critical. Is it a healthy, active, and beautiful place? Is there a dynamic economy? And is there a knowledge-rich ecosystem? And ultimately, is there a strong purpose of place that's based on its history and its kind of natural context? It's almost impossible to get all of these things working, right? Because the places that are healthy and active and dynamic and have maybe a university become really expensive and become unaffordable. And so sort of squaring that equation is really what Knowledge Towns is about. One idea that I've been thinking about in the context of Maine, and in fact, the genesis for this book, which I co-wrote with a professor at Ohio State University, was hanging out in Bangor and saying, wouldn't it be cool if there were a train that could connect Bangor to Portland? Like, what a crazy idea. And then, well, why won't that happen? Well, it's because the state doesn't have any money. It's like, well, the state probably does have money. It just doesn't think it has money, right? Because it owns a lot of land. It owns a lot of assets. Bangor at the time and still was full of parking lots that could be turned into housing. But there was kind of a circularity problem, right? Because, you couldn't build enough housing for workers because there weren't enough jobs. And there weren't enough jobs because there wasn't enough housing. And then you had to sort of drive all the time. You couldn't take the train, and therefore you couldn't fund the train, right? So I saw this was a circular problem. And so I started thinking about, well, if we could build enough clustered housing in downtown Bangor and then build some more housing in Augusta, and then Waterville with Colby is doing its thing, and Brunswick's pretty cool with Bowdoin. And so you got all these amazing little towns, and if you built enough density, you could actually pay for the train, which is a crazy idea, except that if you look at the development of the railway system in the US, it was all paid by property development, right? So we've forgotten how to do that. And so that's kind of my big idea is, why don't we build a knowledge corridor in Maine and anchor it in Portland, which I think is an amazing gateway city, but go all the way up to Orono and then include the coast. So that's what I want to talk about. So with that, I'll head it back to Steve.
Oh yeah, thanks, Dominic.
You're hired.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. I asked you to come up with it. That was a big one. That was a big one. Thank you. Okay, so we've got, this is great because we have sort of the academic startup. Where do the ideas come from? We've got the what are companies looking for, and what does work look like in the future? And then Dominic is where's the place this happens? So we wanted to have this broad conversation. And as you know, earlier today, I mentioned a couple of aspects of this, but now we have the experts with us. Dan, so you've got software background. You know about VC. You've got this ecosystem that you're building. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of the flywheel around that? A little bit more about this concept that we've all talked about, which is if you can seed if you've got a great idea and you can get a company and you can grow the company and you can get workers to come here, and then it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Can you tell?
Well, I think Dominic articulated it pretty well. It takes a critical mass of these things for that flywheel to start to turn. So when I first moved here 20 years ago, the conversation was there aren't enough companies, and then executives said, well, and the companies would say there's not enough executive talent to hire. The executives would turn around and say, well, there's not enough companies to have jobs for. And the folks in capital flows would say there's not enough deal flow. And it's like, wait a minute, it's the same circle. And it does take ultimately a critical mass of talent, a critical mass of innovation ideas, so that you don't feel like you are the only person, right, trying to solve for that problem. And Maine is a rural state. We have low density sort of across the board. And so trying to incubate any one of these activities demands essentially sort of the attractive capabilities of a bit more of a critical mass. we see this in innovation-oriented communities all over the United States, right? I mean, Boston being an example of them, right? Kendall Square was not always Kendall Square, but Austin was not always Austin. Research Triangle Park was not always Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. There are areas of the country that have essentially found ways to aggregate enough of a critical mass to begin that flywheel. Talent begats talent, right? Ideas begat people who are interested in exploring ideas. Those things attract capital and activity, and those people want places to live. Right? And those people then build their lives and their careers and their foundations here. So everything that we're doing at the RU, as an example, is an attempt to try to sort of continue to make that flywheel happen. There are plenty of models for where it has happened. And so, the opportunity I think here in Maine is just to have the Maine flavor of that happening here.
Right. What comes first, Dominic? What do you think comes first? Is it the academic institution? Is it a bunch of money from the government? What is it?
I think in every place it's different. I think here the biggest hole is venture capital, right? You're massively undercapitalized, and you need about $300 to $500 million a year in venture capital in Maine, and that's kind of what's missing. I think the housing is already developing. I mean, there's a lot of constraints, but there's also a lot of motion here. I think you've got some great institutions. I think RU adding to the pile in Portland is great. One of the things I would say about Portland, we were talking about this, is it doesn't feel like a college town and even therefore a knowledge town yet, but it's got a lot of the elements, right? But part of it is how do you integrate all the institutions and including physically, right? How do you get from RU to USM and to downtown, right? And so I think that infrastructure and really think about the connections, but also critically, I'd say the biggest missing gap right now is venture capital.
Okay, so just to bring everybody up to speed on the venture capital, which is when you look at a place like Kendall Square, we've got academic, we've got big firms, we've got startup firms, but we've got the financing source to get those startup firms to turn into big firms. So we have a lot of venture capital. It's not as big as the Bay Area, but so you're arguing that that is a key component to one of these successful clusters.
Yeah, I mean, writ large, venture has driven probably about 100 trillion of the 180 trillion wealth in the US. So it's really the engine of growth, right? And it's even more so the case right now. And so if you don't have it, you're really becoming a kind of digital colony, right? And I think the risk for the state of Maine and many other places, they're becoming digital colonies of the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. Even Boston, which has traditionally been strong, has now fallen behind because it's concentrated, right? So you need to, in order to get those kinds of jobs in enough scale, you need enough venture capital. The really good example for Maine is Vermont, because Vermont is very similar to Maine, except it's in the mountains rather than water. But they had no venture capital until a group came together called Hula, and these guys created a collective. They raised about $150, $200 million of very high net worth people. They just said, listen, put this money to work. It may go to zero because it's risky money, but it could turn into something, right? And they got lucky. They did some good work. They've now had a $7 billion company. There's a few more coming. And so you have a venture ecosystem that's probably 6 or 7 times the size of Maine's, despite Vermont being a much smaller state, being more remote. So that's kind of what needs to be done. It can be done, but it requires a group coming together to kind of make it happen.
So Lauren, can you tell me, is there a company where do your companies want to go and why do they go there?
Well, it's funny. I think leading into the conversation today, we were talking about the Mass AI Coalition, which I'm not sure if that's on anybody's radar in the room. It's brand new. It's a coalition that just launched in Boston probably 2 months ago. And it's very much like this grassroots type of effort where there's consensus from a government level, from a real estate level, from an investment level, that we don't want AI companies that are incubating and launching, coming out of Harvard and MIT to go to New York and San Francisco. We want them to stay in Boston. And so this coalition is really creating those pathways, whether that's in terms of infrastructure, but I think more so in terms of like relationships and people opening up their networks and what they know to make it easier to keep those businesses in the Boston area. And so that's been really fascinating to see. Like, there's just such an appetite. I've heard so many people say, like, we want tech in Boston to feel the way that it did in 2016, so 10 years ago, when it was just totally buzzing, and then we lost some steam because of the pandemic, and now there's this organic push that's really exciting of just an incredible combination of investors and community members coming together to say, we're going to do this thing. We're going to all link arms and keep these companies here in Boston.
Can I just add, Lawrence says something really important. The implication is that, companies and people have agency and choice in where they want to live. And capital has agency too, and choices in where it wants to invest. And we have here in Maine an awful lot of reasons to be very attractive. We don't always talk about them the way that we might. But because it's a marketplace of opportunity, right? We are competing. Everyone is competing for being a part of that opportunity. And we have to look at it as a competitive opportunity for us to take our piece of that much larger opportunity, because agency does live with the companies and the employees and the capital to make choices. We are a choice, but we are by no means the only choice. Same for Boston, same for Vermont, same for anywhere else.
If I could add, I think in addition to competing, I think there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate, right? So though I would say that there may be some rivalry with Boston, there's actually a bigger opportunity to really think about New England as an entire system and integrate everything together, right? And you've seen some great Massachusetts companies that have created a lot of jobs in Maine. It should also be the other way around. And so this is where transit becomes so critical, right? Moving people back and forth so they're part of one system. So actually one of the projects we're looking at is an electric aviation company that would be able to move people very fast, right? So imagine if you wanted to do a project from Portland in Burlington, Vermont. Like if you have to drive that, that's a painful drive, right? You're never going to do it. But if you could fly and it was like $300 and it was 60 minutes and it was kind of an easy experience, you might start doing that a lot, right? And so it's going to take us a while to do rail. I'm a big believer in high-speed rail, but let's get real, right? It's going to take a while. But some of these other things could be done within the next 2 or 3 years. And so thinking about this as a system and how Boston, in a sense, needs to become a metropolis, which is actually financing some of the activity in Maine, and then it's coming back. There's a lot of money. There's about $5 trillion in Boston, right? That could be used to finance an entire build-out of New England, right? And Steve and I have talked about our alma mater, MIT, should get sort of out of Kendall Square, get on the road and start doing stuff in the rest of New England, right? And same thing with Harvard. A lot of these institutions have kind of misread the room. They're right now kind of on their back foot. I think a way for them to kind of get back in the game is to actually start investing in New England.
They should pay attention to Northeastern.
Absolutely. I think Northeastern has blazed a trail. It used to be a commuter school. Interesting enough, the guy that started the Northeastern thing, Chris Hopi, is now my client at Merrimack College. So he was part of the architecture of Northeastern and building all these campuses around the world. And now Merrimack is doing the same thing, right? So it's a small number of players that are really thinking out of the box, right? But every university has all these assets that could be reinvented to kind of drive economic growth and frankly save themselves and sort of again be central to the community, which I think many universities have kind of lost that moment right now.
So we're, Dominic, I quoted you earlier today. I was sharing about how the AI is going to cause, the knowledge is getting portable. It was already portable with work from home during COVID, but now it's really portable because we have these incredible tools that we can use from anywhere. So I hope you don't mind, I shared that now place becomes so important. Kendall Square has a place, but my sense is that Portland does not want to be Kendall Square.
Portland wants to be Portland, but Portland also wants to have opportunity, right, and incremental opportunity. So the opportunity, I think, for any geography, right, is the contextually appropriate flavor of the larger set of opportunity that exists, right? It's not a question of sort of copy and paste of the same approach that you would use in Kendall Square or Austin or wherever. It's we have the longest contiguous coastline in the world, right here in Maine. We have the fastest warming body of water in the world in Casco Bay. We have an amazing set of geographical and related business history advantages in Maine that other places, theirs are different. And so the contextually appropriate flavor of that, I think, is what a Portland, or for that matter, anywhere else wants. And I think place is a very important aspect of this. The other thing that is, though, very democratizing with what's happening is because that expertise is so widely available now, suddenly small companies have the ability to compete in a way that they didn't before.
Yeah, way above their
pay grade, right? You can get that. You were joking earlier about the $5,000 a month, $5,000 an hour attorney, right? But the $5,000 attorney, 85% of that $5,000 attorney is available to you for $20 a month with a subscription. That's amazing for a small firm, right? And
sorry, lawyers. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Beating up on the lawyers.
Not just the attorneys, though, right? I'm a software guy. Think about what's happening for software developers. The democratization of expertise makes small firms have the opportunity to compete in a way that they never used to. So when you think about sort of what's appropriate for a Portland, it may not be a mega firm. It may be lots of hyper-competitive small firms.
And we will soon see the single employee unicorn tech startup that's AI-based. They'll have one employee. It'll be one person with an idea.
One just got acquired last week, right?
Oh, right.
$1 billion by OpenAI. Yeah.
It's called what? Crab?
Something,
Something. And they
keeps changing names.
Keeps changing names, but what?
But it's $1 billion
$1.5 billion, something like that. Yeah. So, so that is coming, and these people can live anywhere. So, Lauren, explain to me a little bit about New York, for example. Rents are incredibly high, even much higher than they were during COVID. Office still is struggling, and it's got, what, 20% occupancy? Not in the Class A buildings, but generally speaking. So this is a leading question. What's going on with that? Why is it that people are paying so much for rents, yet office is struggling?
Well, it's interesting. I spend, as I mentioned, a lot of my time with tech clients. And so despite the vacancy rates that you mentioned as sort of an overall stat for New York, it feels like for tech, they are in absolute crunch mode. It is a race for space right now. And you wouldn't have said that 2 or 3 years ago. But especially for AI companies, something that we've been studying is how variable their growth can be and how hard it is to actually have accurate projections around what their headcounts will be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years out. And it really changes the calculus for somebody that's about to sign a long-term lease, where you're this booming AI company in Manhattan or in Boston or in Portland. And you're like, well, today we're 50 employees. We think in 2 years we're going to be 200, and we think in 5 years we could be 500. But there's a lot that could happen in that 5 years in terms of funding, in terms of product launch, in terms of what our competitors are doing. And so in terms of how it's affecting our real estate process, we're now running a number of different scenarios from a strategy perspective up front so that people can really understand what their options are. And I would say that one of the things that has been most critical in the conversations that are happening in New York and Boston in particular is really looking at expansion rights and how flexible your options are going to be once you decide to land in somewhere like Kendall Square, where you're like, we love this building. Tell us really what's going on in the building stack. There's a curiosity about that expansion potential that maybe didn't exist a few years ago, because people are trying to figure out, if I sign a 2-year lease and we get all the funding that we expect to get, we get all the approvals and our competition dies down, do we have the opportunity to keep growing in this building or not? And that really can affect the viability of a deal. So it's an interesting time.
And you mentioned flexible infrastructure. So this translates into the physical space as well, and what we have to offer as developers. We can't just do the same office anymore, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. And I think one of the things we had talked about in prep was like how many buildings are ready to accommodate that more flexible future. Mm-hmm. The reality is that in some of the more recent conversions that have happened, or some of the new trophy Class A properties that have emerged over the past few years, they're ready. Many of those operators and landlords and developers and architects have made smart decisions about how to plan power, how to use demountable wall systems, how to be thoughtful about what's in your ceiling grid, so that if you need to expand and contract your space, you have the opportunity to do that in a building. It's harder in places like I was just talking about Kendall Square in Cambridge, where you have these legacy buildings that maybe haven't seen that investment. But I think the buildings that, if they don't already have those elements that I was just describing today, they should very quickly make those investments to stay competitive, to accommodate these high growth companies that are saying, we're working one way today, we could be working a totally different way 2 to 3 years from now, and how can this space continue to work for us over that lease term?
Do you think a company that might be looking at New York or Boston, would you recommend they look at Portland and Providence, Rhode Island, and some of the other, I think, kind of more interesting situations?
Well, I'm not a broker, so I can't answer that
that's
as a
true.
broker,
That's true.
but I spend a lot of my time with brokers.
They can tell us.
Yeah,
They can tell us.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the biggest obstacle, and I see this with a lot of the conversations happening with that mass AI coalition, is people want to be part of a cluster. And so it's kind of this chicken or egg thing. It's like once Portland establishes itself and has that brand, has that reputation as an AI cluster, it's like, I don't know where that tipping point is for Portland relative to Boston, relative to New York. Maybe Dominic has a perspective. But once you then have that brand, it's a lot easier to say to a client, hey, let's make sure that we open the aperture and consider.
Well, Dan's creating that.
Yeah, exactly.
Dan's creating that.
Exactly.
How do you, right?
We're all trying to create that, but we're part of it,
Everybody
yeah.
here is creating it, right? But when does it get big enough that it now is on the short list of 5?
So I think we need a lot more, right? I think what Portland needs to be thinking about is how does it double in size, right? Like think big. And I think that growth is a taboo, right? We used to be willing to grow cities, and now in New England at least, we don't think that way. But for example, right, like when we come and stay, my daughter lives in Portland, we stay at the Salt and Pepper buildings in the main mall, the Hilton. And I'm like, this, there's so much land there, right? You could build an entire city in the main mall. And actually, you have an example of this, Tuscan Village in Salem, New Hampshire, which has gone really, really well, where they've built housing instead of all the parking lots. So you imagine, like, could you build 50,000 units of housing in the main mall, and you can still keep the retail, the restaurants? It's going to be full all the time. It's very convenient. And you might say, is that competing with Rue? I don't think so, right? Then I think you need to say, we need rapid transit. So imagine you can get from the main mall very quickly to Rue, to downtown, to USM. And so you need a rapid transit solution. But in Europe, they're building trams everywhere. People love trams. There's lots of different technology solutions. Elon will build you an underground tunnel, if you want to, right? So I really think the thing is there's a taboo, and I'm here to break the taboo. I'm working with the city of Pittsburgh, and I said, let's grow 500,000 people. Like, how about that, right? And it was kind of embarrassing the first time I said it, but then I kind of did the math, and it's like, if you seriously want to compete with Austin, Texas, you need to add about 500,000 people. And so I think Portland needs to be thinking the same way. By the way, not just Portland, right? I think all of Maine, especially the key kind of nodes, the cities, can increase capacity, especially in the centers of the cities. And you're going to see revitalization, a lot of economic growth. It's dead simple. It's just that we as a society have forgotten stuff that our ancestors knew implicitly, right? We somehow have missed that moment, and it's just bringing it back.
I will mention that today the numbers are out. The first time since 1935, the U.S. has had a decrease, a positive outmigration of 120,000 people, which means this competition is going to get worse, unfortunately. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. Lauren, can you tell us with your clients, so we're making an assumption that workers need office space. We know they need places to live. They need places to shop. And but do they need places to work? What's the situation? Are people going back to the office, or are they not ever going back?
Oh gosh, I hope I never have to say RTO ever again in my life. Like, let that be the last time.
Yeah, I think we were kind of over that whole.
We're over RTO.
I'm sorry to bring it up.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine.
Well, but AI matters because we're
Right.
saying, oh, now you can live anywhere, which implies
Right.
that you don't have to go to the office.
Yeah. And it also makes me just think of what's on probably all of our minds, which is what is our professional relevance, and will AI take our jobs in the most simplistic form?
And we're gonna get to that.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think, it's fascinating. AI has definitely been a factor in terms of what's happening with remote and flexible work. I know that there are some very vocal thought leaders on this topic who get a lot of airtime in the media, and I think it sort of slants our perception of what is really happening day to day. So what we've seen in New England, which was one of the slower regions to come back to the office, is that people are spending on average 3.23 days in the office. And I think we've arrived at that sweet spot where we figured out, like, okay, being together matters. The work is different. The work product is different when we are actually together. But in order to retain our highest value talent, we have to give them some degree of flexibility. My footnote to that is that, interestingly, a pattern I'm seeing with AI clients is that they want their employees in the office 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's almost what tech was pre-COVID, where it's all about the culture. They want you there after hours, they want you to be hanging out with leadership and the C-suite so that you really feel connected to the brand and you feel this sense of loyalty by spending so much time in the office together. So that's what I'm seeing day to day.
There's some research from MIT that the most innovation happens with physical proximity. It's a study called Proximate. You can find it online. So we sort of know that. It's sort of intuitive, but now we have some data behind it. So Dan, can you tell us a little bit about, let's shift a little bit to what does that labor force look like? Because you teach this, what does that labor force look? We've talked about what they might want in their kind of their lifestyle and what the feel of where they work and the feel of where they live and where that is. But what do they actually need? Especially because everybody here is going to be hiring them.
Sure. Well, so you said it earlier. This is a data-intensive industry, right? Mm-hmm. And we have really a new economy that's sprung up over the past, call it, decade around data. We generate now more data every year than we have in the entire history of the human species, right? Every single year we do that. Okay, so that's a very, very steep curve. Now, the way we're generating that is not that we are necessarily generating that data. It's that our devices and our machines and our Internet of Things and all the sensors that you may put in buildings and all the drones that you're using are generating massive quantities of data. We also sit on, as you said earlier, massive amounts of data in our companies that could be really interesting that we are wildly underutilizing. So what the employees of the future need to understand is enough data literacy to be able to figure out how am I going to use this to add value to the firm. That was not really a problem that we trained the previous generation of workers on because we just didn't have that much data to work with. Now we do. So there's an opportunity for people essentially to reinvent themselves in any function. Doesn't matter if you're in sales, you're in operations, you're in supply chain, you're in marketing, you are a data analyst. Because of the fact that the company's key asset that they have is their proprietary data. So
that does scare people a little. No, now I've got to be a data analyst.
Well, the beautiful thing is, though, that the transition to that has never been more accessible, right? This goes back to the democratization of this expertise. You don't have to already know how to be a data analyst, right? You can come to my school and learn how to do that very much sort of aggressively, and that's really fun, and I encourage many of you to do that. But now, thanks to the tooling, right, you have the ability to essentially rent some of the expertise of a data analyst relatively cheaply to use on behalf of your firm if you know how to deploy it. So now we need to become essentially more literate in the use of and consumption of AI-based augmented tooling. And that's what really most people are spending a lot of time on right now is figuring out how do I use these things effectively? How do I know when they're lying? or that they're incorrect, right? They're not really lying intentionally. They are using probabilities, and sometimes the probability is wrong. But you need to be the educated consumer of that in order to be able to get value out of this AI augmented tooling. And so learning how to do that is important. Our employees need to learn. They need to experiment. They need to work with it. They need to say, hey, there was an example somebody used earlier about cost estimation, right? They need to compare, right? Is it as good? Is it bad? Where is it wrong? Where is it right? I have a bunch of experience. I can smell test the output, right? Because the next employee who doesn't have that experience may not be able to automatically smell test the output, so we need to sort of build the norms to figure out how to use these tools very effectively. That's a real massive retraining and upskilling opportunity for all of us. And we've already done this. We did it when the internet happened. Right? Remember life before the internet? Right? It was very different than life after the internet, and we all learned things that we didn't know before the internet. This is another one of these inflection points where everybody, senior leadership, entry-level employees, right, have an opportunity essentially to learn how to do things in a new way. That's fun. So when we think about sort of the workplace of the future, it's a learning workplace. It's a constant sort of evolution of, hey, here's a new set of capabilities. Let me figure out how to use these effectively to do my job better, because the job is not to use AI. The job is to do business, and we want to use AI to accomplish the job. And so to become an educated user and consumer of this sort of AI augmented tooling.
Thank you. I have a question, but just to preface the question, the SaaS-mageddon, I guess is what it was called, right? So it seems like every sector is getting destroyed in the stock market because of the hand-wringing over the impact of AI. And real estate was not immune. So JLL, CBRE, Colliers, Newmark, Cushman, they all got hit by 10, 15, 20, 25%. And the CEOs, Christian Ulbrecht is saying, explaining why that might have happened and why it may not be accurate. But we come back to in our business, it's a people business. AI it's not going to have that much of an impact on us. It's a people business. It's about relationships. What do you think?
Well, I am not Christian Ulbrich, but I'm sure he gave a very smart answer in all of his CNBC interviews. The reality is that the two biggest expenses for most companies are people and real estate. And in many cases where people are still signing 5 and 10-year leases, that's a big number. It can be $1 million, $5 million, $20 million, more than that, right? I think we are very far off from somebody relying on a bot or AI or an LLM in some form or fashion to advise them through a process that costs them millions of dollars. And so when we talk about it being a people-centric or relationship-centric business, I think that's a lot of what it translates to or boils down to, is that people are just not comfortable enough with the technology yet to say, oh, I'm just going to let AI guide me through my next commercial real estate transaction that's going to last my business for another 5 to 10 years. We're just not there yet. But I think what's exciting is that a lot of companies like JLL and others, is that we are using AI to advise our clients to make smarter and better decisions. I mentioned the number of scenarios that we're running at the onset of a process. That wasn't necessarily the way that we were working 10 years ago, and we're using AI to do a lot of that modeling. So it's helping us to be better and faster and more efficient at our jobs. But I think there's just a lot of fear that drove some of what happened with our stocks recently.
And I didn't mean to pick on JLL, but everybody's, who's up next, right?
Exactly.
What sector is up next that's going to get beat down because of the hand-wringing over the changes that are happening? Right. Dominic, thoughts on the workforce and AI workforce? You said it could end up being about place, except now they still have to go to the office 5 days a week.
Well, place is the office, right? And I think it's interesting. London, which had a similar effect to New York, now they're literally running out of office space because everybody's back in the office. What is the difference? They have a better tube system so people can move around more. And so it's really place connected to transport, connected to home, and it's really about giving people flexibility. And so this is really, I think the opportunity for Maine is, Maine has everything, right? It's got tons of ocean, coastline. It's got lakes, it's got rivers, it's got mountains, it's got ski. It has everything. And so I really believe that talent is looking to come to Maine. They're looking to come to a small town and bring up their kids and have an amazing life, right? And so the question is, how do you call that talent? And what do you offer them, right? And the first thing you offer them is place. And that's where real estate really has the keys to the kingdom, right? The question is, what kind of place, right? It's probably a mixture of office, housing, the right housing solutions, a place where innovation happens, so a beautiful place where people want to come and exchange ideas. It's the ability to move around from one place to the other. So this is where I think the real estate sector can move from being, we talked at another conference about the real estate feeling like they were in the little kids table at Thanksgiving, like not in the big kids table, which is where the tech guys are, which right now they're drowning out the conversation, right? They're raising trillions of dollars. It's going into AI data centers. And I think real estate as a sector is kind of sitting a little bit back, not quite sure what to do. I would argue you got to lean in. We were actually talking with a bunch of people about Augusta, right? How do we create maybe a kind of strategy to build around what's already happening in Augusta, beautiful state capital, and turn it into something more? But it won't happen by accident. It will happen by a collective of people that love a place saying, we're going to make this an amazing place. We're going to attract people, and we're going to deliver on all these pieces. And I think Maine could be doing this across the entire state.
And do you think we need to identify what is the, you pointed to it a little bit, Dan, about what's the essence of Portland. I had a conversation with somebody that's involved with the blue economy that runs from Connecticut. I think it comes all the way up into Maine.
Yep.
But can you speak a little bit about that? Unlocking this is an ecosystem of companies and thinking, and old companies and new companies, and it's relevant to the coast, because you wouldn't do that if you didn't have water. What's that kind of opportunity?
Well, I think there's an assumption sometimes in tech that every place is the same because we're all just connected to the internet and we're this sort of virtual thing. But in reality, places have very distinct characteristics. Maine has a whole bunch of very distinct characteristics, right? The water being one of them, but by no means the only one. And as a simple example, right? I don't know if anybody's ever thought about this, but the shortest way to launch a satellite in a polar Earth orbit over water is from Maine in the United States. Right? You could maybe do it from Michigan, but you're not really over water because Canada's in the way. And you can do it from Alaska. That's the only other spot. And that's not in the lower 48. So that's an interesting geographic advantage. What do we want to do with that, right? That's not something that you can copy and paste.
Is there an aerospace opportunity?
There is most definitely an aerospace opportunity. We haven't really sort of maximized the opportunity yet. But that is an example of something that is completely geographically dependent. It's hardwired into the geography of the place. You can't sort of override that with a computer. And so I do think that understanding what natural geographic place-bound assets we have is important, and building and designing around them. Some of those are geography, some of those are history, and sort of the history of the people who are here and the companies who have been here beforehand to build on as well. But I think that catalog is useful. A lot of people in the state are trying to do that, no question. The state government has been sort of intentional about identifying top sectors for investment and similar, and we, at least at the RU, are trying to work in those sectors very much. But place, I think, unique opportunities that are geographically bound are a huge part of where we can differentiate and do something really, really useful, even if it's ultimately a large corridor.
Anecdotally, it's my understanding that the space program was supposed to be in Kendall Square, but went to Texas, sadly, when Lyndon Johnson took over. But the Volpe, right? Is this true, Dominic? The Volpe site there in Kendall Square was supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, Kennedy was
supposed to be for the space program. But so
you guys did okay, though.
We did okay. But you know, some of this is also kind of happenstance. We have to also remember. I like this other example that came up on the call, which is anybody know where Bezos started his company? Albuquerque, New Mexico. What if Bezos hadn't gone from Albuquerque to Seattle? Now you have Seattle. It was Bezos, right? Or
it was Gates.
It was Gates. I screwed up. Sorry. It was Gates.
Another billionaire.
Another billionaire.
Well, Bezos went to Seattle too.
Well, but that's the point. Is that and now did they go there for the same reason?
You know, Bezos went to Seattle because that was where the biggest warehouse of books was in the country, and he started by selling books, right? So it was kind of an accident of fate because Amazon started as a bookseller. That's why he moved to Seattle, right? And then Bill Gates moved to Seattle because that's where his family was from, and he just wanted to be back kind of home, right? So it's kind of accidents of fate that then resulted in trillions of value moving.
We look at that, and the rest is history, with the hundreds, if not thousands, of startups that spun out of those companies, and all of the millionaires and billionaires that got created out of that. Now, it was a 50-year overnight success, but how could that happen as a smaller version in Portland? Or in this region? How might that happen? I mean, those were sort of accidents.
Yeah, I mean, I think Austin is a really interesting one because Austin was kind of this laid-back capital. Then you had Dell start there a little bit by accident. Then you had a bunch of computer companies, and it's now past Boston and even New York as probably the number 2 or 3 tech city in the U.S., right? So it's taken about 30 to 40 years. I think Portland, again, with RU, to me, is a major statement. Also having other universities in the sense creates really the foundation for it being a college town. But I think it has to do some other big moves, right? That's why the main mall, to me, seems like an obvious one. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's also things that are negative, right? Like I know many people in real estate know that I think the 20% affordable has really slowed down construction in Boston. Same as in Boston, sorry, in Portland, same in Boston, by the way. So there's things that have been done that are hurting it. I think venture capital is really the missing piece, right? So Maine has been going backwards in venture capital. And so I would say it's funny because I'm talking about that in a place of real estate, but I would say for real estate people, having a venture ecosystem that's thriving is going to be very beneficiary to you, because that's bringing in high-paying jobs that is going to go right into the value of apartments, right? So thinking about, hey, I'm in real estate, but I need to also be in venture capital. I'm somebody that was in venture capital, and I had to work my way into real estate. And it's uncomfortable, right? Like, what is a cap rate? You know, because outside of real estate, you don't call them cap rates. You say yield or ROI. And so everything has its own language. But I would actually argue, if you're in real estate, you should be thinking about, how do you collaborate with a university? Guess what? They're really hard to work with. Very hard to work with. But every university has about 400 acres of land. They're desperate for new business models. So if you can work with them, you can get a lot out of them, right? How do you work with the state? The state owns tons of land. Philanthropies own tons of land in Maine, right? So but partnering with them in perhaps non-traditional models. And then how do you partner with the VCs? So it's really getting out of one's own silo and starting to learn other languages and being comfortable moving around from different worlds.
Yeah, thank you. I want to take some questions. Do we have any questions out there? Otherwise, we'll keep going for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to wrap up. Here's a question here. We might get a microphone for them. Thank you. So, great conversation. We had a lot to talk about, and it's a lot to stitch together. So thank you. Yeah, question.
Hey there. So with the use of AI being injected into just about everything that's out there for it, are we also considering the compliance that's following it right behind? Because we're seeing this all come to market also as fast as you're using AI and you're starting to try to save costs. Not really, manpower, maybe you're trying to replace manpower or have them leverage it, but compliance is coming behind it with its own costs and oversight now that you have to inject into your companies. Is that being considered and taught?
Can I jump in on this one? So that triad framework that I was talking about asks you to think about the context within which you might be using AI in your company. And part of that context is going to be follow-on issues related to compliance and regulatory. Now, some of those things are things that you can identify today because there are existing compliance regimes that you have to comply with. But, of course, a lot of this is being legislated in the courts as well in real time, right? The intellectual property considerations are being legislated live in real time. So that for you, that's a risk factor. If you become highly dependent on a vendor, right, that's a risk factor, as an example, and that's something that you want to bake into your use of AI. And I would differentiate here between the notion of AI as an individual productivity assistant, where I am using a chatbot, and maybe the sum of our use of a chatbot adds value to the firm because we're more individually efficient. That's one use case. But where companies are really getting interesting value out of AI is when they bring it into an enterprise level workflow. And those do carry a lot more downstream potential compliance questions. So is it being taught? Well, a lot is being legislated live in front of us in real time. But factoring in both the risk and the ongoing sort of care and feeding that's associated with managing that risk is part of planning your project. There are questions in the triad framework that would lead you down that path for your company context. So you're exactly on the right track, right? It's not just about the functionality, it's about the context within which we're going to use that functionality.
Great question, thank you. I know the drink tickets are burning a hole in our pockets. So I would like to ask, not yours, yeah, not yours. Right. Before we go, what does the world look like, or maybe just Maine and Portland? Give us a vision 10 years from now. And maybe I'll probably end with Dominic, because yours is, actually, I know yours, Dominic. It's going to be transportation and VC. Was that it?
Yeah, I've given enough vision. I'll defer to my colleagues. But my vision is really this corridor. I would envision 20 nodes or more across Maine, maybe 4 or 5 in Portland, and then a series across all the way to Orono and a few south. And really, I think I'd be thinking about how do you attract something in the order of $20 billion of investment into Maine over the next decade, right? A lot of it in real estate, but some of it in venture capital and also in talent attraction, right? How do you actually identify talent and then get it to come here? My triad is place, tech, and talent. You got to do all 3 of them simultaneously.
And that's only $2 billion a year. Lauren, other than your kids will be in middle school by then?
Yeah, exactly.
10 years from now?
I think it would be really cool for us as stewards of commercial real estate to be opening the aperture, and to the question that you posed earlier, to have Portland be part of somebody's calculus if they're thinking of having either an offshoot or a headquarters in the New England area, for Portland to be a real contender, because there is an established talent cluster and there are these infrastructural changes that we've been talking about today. I think that'd be incredible.
Or possibly the other towns in Maine. I know we talked a lot about Portland,
Yeah.
but other great towns in Maine as well. So, okay, that's a great one. And I'll leave it, Dan, I'm going to let you have the last word on this because you are probably the closest to it and the most invested in it.
The pressure's on. I think what I would say is we were talking earlier about what it was like to be 22 in Washington, D.C., and how much fun that was when we were 22 and starting our careers, right? Because there was a lot of opportunity, there was a lot of energy, and you could turn around and say, I want to do this for a while, but oh, that's interesting, I want to go do that, right? That's what I aspire to here, that people can look around and not think, hey, for that opportunity, I got to leave, right? They can think, I can build my life here and have that opportunity, right? That's where this gets really, really exciting. So I think all of our partners in the ecosystem are aligned on wanting that to happen, but that's really what we hope for.
That's great. Dan, Lauren, Dominic, thank you very much for a great conversation. Thank you. And to MEREDA, thank you very much for having us today, giving us the privilege to have this conversation with all of you.
Thank you so much. I've already friended them on LinkedIn while I was sitting there. I hope everybody else did too. Steve, I can't believe I saw you talking the entire time. That's
All
amazing.
afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, so what an incredible panel. Thank you again to Steve, Lauren, Dominic, and Dan. What a dynamic discussion. There's a lot of discussed and valuable information for us to discover, to consider as we integrate AI into our own workplaces and processes. Thank you to all of our presenters for participating in today's program. Thank you to moderators of the afternoon sessions, Marika Thorman, Jennifer Small, Jason Howe. A lot of hard work and preparation goes into these presentations, and we greatly appreciate everyone's effort. Thank you again to the gold sponsors, TD Bank and Perkin Tompkins, and all of our event sponsors. Thank you to our audio-visual partners. Headlight AV went off without a hitch, like always. Thanks, guys. There were lots of logistics behind the scenes. We're grateful for all of your help. Thank you to our PR and marketing partners, Words at Work. Their support and vision helped make today happen. Thank you, Paula and crew. We can't end the day without saying thank you to the wonderful Shelley Clark and our conference committee who put the enormous amount of work into executing this event. 1,000 people like us, that's a big deal, getting us all somewhere. Talk about herding cats. And again, if you'd like to receive continuing education credits, don't forget you have to sign out on your way out. If you don't do that, you won't get them. It's a use it or lose it situation, folks. Please mark your calendars for the next morning menu in Portland on March 19th, and networking social in Bangor on April 2nd, and the notable night at Hannaford Hall on April 30th for all the award winners. Shelley will be sending out a survey. Please fill it out. We want to know what you liked and what you didn't like so we can improve it next year. And thank you to everybody here for joining us and enjoying the show, and head down to the member showcase.